This is the audiobook for The Beauty of Japan, a book written by me, Stefan Jenkins. The book took me about a year and a half to write, and it's based on an old Japanese legend. Two teachers move to Tsushima, a remote Japanese island, and they awaken a deadly 500-year curse. With the help of the Tsushima Yamanekos, the two must fight against the darkest myths in Japanese mythology to survive. So let's jump straight into the book. Tsushima Island is a Japanese island fixed between mainland Japan and South Korea. Very few know about the island's long history, and those who do see its beauty and its darkness. This book is inspired by true events and myths that have taken place on the island. Chapter 1: The Story of the Beautiful Woman. Tsutsu is a majestical coastal town at the bottom of Tsushima, with coastal views most could only dream to see. The year was 1523. Many fishermen have lived on the island, and many more will live on the island, without ever meeting an outsider. Even fewer would travel to Japan's or Korea's mainland. On rare occasions, a Japanese or Korean merchant would stop on the island to trade, but this was rare. The island's biggest claim to fame was when the Mongols attacked it. Tsushima was one of the few places that managed to fight the Mongols and lived to tell the tale, but the tales of war were beginning to fade. While many fishermen saw the gem of Tsushima as its bountiful coast, for most men it was Yuna Abe. She was a young woman, only 20 years old. She had beautiful, whiter than snow skin, rose-red lips, and a figure most women could only dream of having. Her long black hair flowed from her body like a tide on a dark winter's night. Thanks to the island's remoteness, she hadn't met many outsiders, nor did she intend to. Few knew of her beauty, including even herself. She knew she wasn't an ugly girl, but she thought she was just an average Tsutsu girl. She hoped to marry a fisherman, have fisherman children, and live the life of a fisherman's wife. Yuna's mother, Hina, was a frail woman. Like Yuna, she was a beauty in her own time, but time can be cruel. It stripped her of her beauty and her health. Yuna's father was like the rest of the family. He was a kind man, born to be a fisherman. He loved the sea. As a child, his parents joked that he was born half fish. He spent every moment he could, even in the sea or next to it, on the island's many beaches. But even the best fishermen perish at sea. Yuna remembers last seeing her father like it was yesterday. The weather was so clear in the harbour that morning. As her father's boat left the port, she remembers hoping he would bring back something good for dinner. The last catches had only been squid. She was getting very tired of it. Neither of them knew one of the worst typhoons to hit the island was on its way. The island was heavily damaged after the storm. Both Yuna and her mother knew there was no chance he could survive. For months they went to local shrines to pray for his return, but their prayers were never answered. 5 years later, both Yuna and her mother were living close to a normal life without him. Hina had fallen ill with crippling arthritis. She was always in pain, especially in the cold winters. Most days she struggled to walk. Yuna was now working, repairing fishing nets and making clothes. She was extremely talented when it came to designing clothes and repairing sails. If she had lived on the mainland, she would have been a wealthy designer. Yuna had begun seeing a boy named Takeru Tanaka. She was finally ready to let someone into her life after the death of her father. She had found it hard to connect with people ever since that day. She kept most people at arm's length. This only added to her allure. Takeru was a strong young fisherman, 22 years old, of average height and quite handsome. But Yuna's eternal beauty well outshone his. Takeru had always been kind to Yuna and her mother. After the death of her father, he would leave fish for the two to eat. He would also help Hina carry her supplies back from the market on the rare days she ventured outside. Takeru had always found Yuna beautiful and knew he wanted to marry her the first day he saw her. The young fisherman finally got the courage to confess his love to Yuna 6 months ago. Both became smitten with each other. They were set to marry in the fall. Takeru's family had all started to accept Yuna into their family. She visited the family for lunch or dinner almost every day. Takeru's mother Yumi loved Yuna. She was a good cook, polite and great at sewing, a task she hated. Yumi was also happy that Yuna had her own job. She knew if something happened to Takeru, her grandchildren would be cared for. Takeru's father, Soma, was also a fisherman, but he was spending less and less time at sea thanks to Takeru. Soma was very happy about this. He wanted to spend more time with his bonsai trees and with the rest of the family. He longed to become a grandfather and couldn't wait for the two to get married. Soma loved looking after his bonsai trees. He had many different types, lots of which he had grown from seeds when he was Takeru's age. His oldest tree was the Japanese Judas tree. The tree was so beautiful. Today it would have won countless awards. The tree would bloom a beautiful shade of pink. Most had never seen the colour before. It was the envy of many of the townspeople. 2 years ago, the tree had almost been killed when it was left outside overnight. A curious deer decided to eat most of it. After that night, the tree was brought inside, like clockwork every night. When the sun started to go down, the tree was brought inside. Takeru had one brother and one sister, both younger than him. His sister Miri was 8 years old and a lively child. Miri loved it when Yuna visited the house. She always wanted a big sister and was excited for the wedding. Whenever Yuna visited, she ran to her, jumping in joy, asking for the two to play together. Like most children, Miri thought Yuna only visited the house to play with her. Takeru's brother Riku was 16 years old. He had only just begun fishing with Takeru most mornings. Fishing wasn't Riku's passion. He much preferred farming. He liked fishing, but only during the summer. The winter sea air can be punishing, even on the most seasoned fishermen. Yuna had just finished making her kimono for the wedding. She was excited to show it to Miri and Yumi, but they would never get to see the dress. The priest or Shinshiku of the Emperor's fleet pulled into Tsutsu Harbor on his way to Korea. Ryo Goto regularly made his trips to Korea to find medicine or artifacts. He searched for anything that could improve the health of the Emperor and his other patients. The Emperor was 60 years old and it showed. The priest Ryo had already saved the Emperor's lives many times. In the last 5 years, the ruler now held Ryo in the highest regard. This was the first time Ryo would stop in Tsushima. His ship's sail had been damaged in a small, unexpected storm. There was no way the priest was going to arrive in Korea with a damaged sail. This would have been a great embarrassment to both him and the great nation of Japan. When he docked in the harbour, the priest's men found the most qualified person to repair the sail. Unfortunately, this was Yuna. She was excited when the priest's men first brought the sail to her. This was going to be her big payday. She thought fixing such an important man's sail would bring more business to her. Stories had reached Tsushima of the great priest Ryo, who had saved the Emperor's life. She fixed the sail the next day and was excited for it to be inspected and taken back to the ship. To Yuna's surprise, it wasn't one of the priest's men who came to inspect the sail, but the priest himself. The priest was a tall, handsome, athletic man. He had a scar through his eyebrow which only made him more rugged and masculine. He was a very competent swordsman. He trained in many different forms of combat and with many weapons. This was expected for a man of his nobility at the time. He was almost 45 but didn't look it. Some say this was due to his magic powders and charms. Ryo was blown away by Yuna's beauty. As a priest, he was banned from taking a wife. Even being with a woman was highly frowned upon. This, though, didn't stop him from releasing his urges from time to time. The great priest Ryo asked Yuna if she had a husband. Yuna wishes to this day that she had said yes, but she told the truth and said she was engaged to a local fisherman. Ryo, compelled by her beauty, told her to call off the wedding. He told Yuna she was so beautiful the Emperor would fall madly in love with her. She should become one of his concubines. In return, she would receive her own large home, clothes, jewelry, and whatever she wanted. Yuna was shocked by the priest's proposition and wasn't sure how to respond. She politely told him that she loved Takeru and couldn't leave the island without her mother, who was too frail to travel. Ryo told Yuna her beauty was wasted on this island, but he understood. He paid for the sail and left. Yuna thought that would be the end of her dealings with the priest, but she was wrong. Ryo Goto desperately wanted a family to pass his wisdom on to. When he saw Yuna, he knew he had to have her as his wife. He thought if he had to be with one person for the rest of his life, it had better be with someone as beautiful as Yuna. He could never get tired of her body. He lied to Yuna because he knew if the priest had found out about his plan to marry before he asked the emperor, they would put a stop to it by killing her. Ryo was in love once 10 years ago. He fell in love with one of his patients from Kobe. He had intentions of leaving the temple and marrying her, but the other priests found out about his plans, and they killed her and gave him the scar on his face to remember what happens to those who try to break tradition. The last time the priest saved the emperor's life, he promised he could make one demand for anything he wanted. Ryo was going to ask permission to have a wife and for protection from the priesthood. The only person the temple couldn't stop was the emperor. When Ryo got back to his sheep, he demanded his men find the fisherman engaged to Yuna. Takeru was coming back from the port when they found him. The young fisherman thought the priest wanted to meet him to make some kind of fish deal, but he was wrong. The priest offered to buy Yuna from him. The price he offered for her would have been more than enough to buy a whole fleet of fishing boats. It would have made him the wealthiest man in Tsushima. Ryo told Takeru that the emperor had heard of her beauty and wanted to make her his concubine, but the young fisherman declined. Takeru said no money would be enough for the love that they had. This response angered the priest. He told his men to take him and the family hostage and to steal Takeru's boat and sink it in the sea. This, of course, was to be done without any witnesses. The priest gave Takeru a choice: end his relationship with Yuna, or him and his family would be killed. Through fear of what was going to happen to his family, he did what he was told. He went to see Yuna that night and ended the relationship. Yuna had no idea what happened to his boat or his family. She was heartbroken. She cried all night and told her mother she would never love again. By this time, Takeru came back to his home to save his family. The sun was starting to rise. It was a beautiful summer's morning. Takeru slid his sliding door open to find his mother and father and sister and brother all dead on the tatami floor. Takeru didn't even have a chance to think. He felt a hand grab him from behind and slit his throat. His half-dead body hit the floor, gasping for air. The last thing he saw was his young sister's cold, lifeless body. Ryo and two of his men had been waiting for Takeru to return. Ryo wasn't going to risk some ex-lover coming to ruin his relationship with his new wife. The sun was now too bright to move the bodies out of the house unseen. Ryo ordered his men to stay at the house. They were instructed to wait until the darkness fell. Then they were told to take the bodies out to the ocean and dump them there. He told the men he would go to Korea without them. He would return in 3 days. Once his work was complete, he would collect them and Yuna. The next morning, Yuna was unaware of what happened to Takeru and his family. She woke up to find the priest Ryo talking to her mother. Hina knew she would live a better and easier life on the mainland, even if it was the life of a concubine. She didn't want her daughter to suffer as she did. She insisted that her daughter go with the priest to the mainland after he returned from Korea. Yuna didn't want to leave her mother alone on the island, but the priest promised once she returned to Kyoto with him, he would come back to the island and cure his mother of all ailments. She could then join them in Kyoto. Ryo explained that it would take some time for him to find the necessary medicine to heal her. This, of course, was a lie. The police planned on leaving her to rot on the island or sending someone to kill the mother. He didn't want her to interfere in their relationship, but he hadn't decided what to do with her, death or abandonment. Despite his last actions, the priest didn't like killing when he didn't have to. Yuna felt she had no other option. She had no one else on the island who loved her and desperately wanted her mother to get better. She agreed to go with the priest to Kyoto. It was the night before she was set to leave. She hadn't seen Takeru or his ship since he broke her heart. Yuna had to say goodbye to all of her friends on the island. She couldn't resist it any longer. Even though she thought Takeru didn't love her anymore, she just wanted to see him one last time. She went to the harbour that night but couldn't see his boat. She decided to write him a letter and leave it at his house. She walked to Takeru's home and found it strange. It was the only house without any candles lit. Takeru's father's prized bonsai tree was still outside after dark. She knocked on the door and there was no answer. Yuna slid the door open and found the bodies lying on the floor. She burst into tears, wondering who could have done this. She tried to call for help, but fear silenced her body. She heard the voices of the priest's men walking towards her. She ran into the wardrobe, fearing that she would be next. 2 days ago, once the priest left, the two men decided to go for a drink before moving the bodies. Hoping to calm their nerves, they were far from cunning assassins, and were nothing more than thugs. This turned into a 2-day bender. They joked a couple of times, it's not like the bodies are going anywhere. The two thugs knew they would never return to the island and wanted to make the most of it. They drank and ate the island's many delicacies. Yuna heard the men talking while they wrapped the bodies in bedsheets and fishing nets. Both men wished they had followed the priest's orders and done this the first night. The bodies had begun to decay and started to stink. The two thugs thought it strange for the priest to kill a family just so the emperor could have a concubine. He already had many second wives and was old and sickly. Yuna waited for a while, planning what to do. She thought about telling the village what had happened, but she knew there was nothing she could do. The priests had many men, most of whom were trained soldiers. After some time, she finally decided she was going to have her revenge. She was going to kill the priest herself. The priest returned the next morning. His ship docked in the port, and he eagerly walked to Yuna's house, ready to collect his new wife. He had originally planned on waiting until they were married to have his fun with her, but she was all he could think about while he was in Korea. The second he got her back to the boat, he was going to take her, whether she liked it or not. As the great priest approached Yuna's house, he saw her and her friends waiting to see Yuna off. Yuna was wearing the beautiful kimono she had made for her wedding. The priest was taken aback by her beauty. He had never seen anyone look so elegant. As the priest got close to Yuna, she ran to him and embraced him. All those watching were shocked. Why is she hugging him? They wondered. The priest believed in his delusional state that she must have fallen for him. He closed his eyes and breathed her in, smelling her beautiful perfume. As he took a large breath, Yuna took the small rigid knife around Ryo's waist and plunged the blade into his stomach. Yuna pushed him away, screaming, "May another beautiful woman never be born in this village again." She slammed her teeth into her tongue, biting it clean off. Blood started pouring from her mouth. The beautiful woman then took the priest's knife and slit her own throat, killing herself. The priest was writhing in pain on the floor. He opened a small pouch on his belt and pulled out a vial and a bag with powder in it. He poured and stuffed the powder into his wound and drank the vial. He rose to his feet and limped back to the ship. Using all of his healing abilities and all the magic he could muster, Ryo managed to keep himself alive for another day. But Ryo knew his life was coming to an end. He ordered his men to dig a grave for the beautiful woman. Before the grave was filled, the priest cursed it. "Those who embrace by this grave shall be haunted by this woman in life and in death. She will never see love again." The great priest Ryo was taken to Azamo near Tsutsu. The local had a name for this land. It was called the Land of Terror. The men prepared a small tomb for him. With his dying breath, he cursed his resting place, promising to one day return to the island and bring about its destruction. The villagers never knew why she killed herself or the priest's two curses, but they knew of Yuna's curse. To this day, local women still stay away from her grave in the event they need to pass it. If they need to pass it, they will cover their faces, terrified of raising her. This has stopped anyone from ever embracing by the grave. Rumors spread on the island that Yuna killed Takeru and his family. Their bodies were never found. To local people, they just disappeared. Other rumors stated they left the island out of embarrassment or fear of what the emperor might do to them. After all, the priest was his best healer and Takeru was engaged to marry Yuna. Hina didn't live long after that day. Without Yuna's help, she couldn't survive the cold winter. She died cold, in pain, and alone. Hundreds of years have passed since then. Both the beautiful woman and the priest are waiting for their return. Be sure to subscribe and follow. If you actually want to read this book yourself, it is available on Amazon or on my Ko-Fi. I'll put a link in the description for it. And chapter 2 will be coming in the next couple of days. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.